So to get started for this one, we're just going to be using a plane here. I just took it and scaled it up a few times. And then for the lighting, I'll go ahead and to the shading tab here. I just have a 3D viewport and a shader editor. And then you can go to top orthographic view by pressing this Z right here. That'll take you there. Or you can press 7 on your number pad to get up here. Then I'm going to be using the cycles renderer. And I'm going to uncheck scene world here and use the built-in forest 3D lighting that Blender already has. Then we're going to press new and we'll type in Terracotta tile like so, and we're good to go. Now we're going to go to edit preferences and enable the Node Wrangler add-on if you haven't already done that. So preferences add-on, search up Node Wrangler and hit this checkbox here. Then we'll press Shift A and we're going to be using a brick texture for this one. Then with this selected, we can press Control and T to get us our mapping. So for this mapping, we're going to be using UV coordinates. You can also use object coordinates if you want, but some of the scales will be different. You can just adjust that stuff at the end if you feel like it. But for now, we're going to be using UV coordinates. So we can Control, Shift, and left click this brick texture, and we can preview it. Currently, it's looking like brick and not like tile. So to change that, we're just going to change a few of these values. Firstly, we'll change the offset to 0, so everything lines up perfectly. Then we're going to take this brick height, or brick width actually down here and change it to a 0.25. So now we have our square tiles. We can also switch both these values to 1 theoretically if we wanted to, but I'm going to be using 0.25 in this video. Then I'm going to take this scale here, we're going to switch to a 4 just so that we can get a little bit bigger tiles on our thing. And then this mortar size, I'm going to be switching that way down to a 0.05 like this, or no, a 0.005. That was a mistake. Yep, so we get the mortar size real small, or the grout in this case because it's not brick. Then we're going to take this color 1 here and we're going to make it a pure white. So move the value all the way up to 1, no saturation or hue. Then this color 2, the value to a 0.5, again, no saturation or hue. So this is a sort of complex material, and to get started, we're going to start with the color, and then we'll go into the roughness and then the bump afterwards. To get started with that, we're going to be dividing up the mortar or the grout from the actual tiles. So we're going to hit Shift A and search for a math node here. And then we're going to switch the function on him to less than. Then we'll take this color and move it up to the value. And we're going to leave this on 0.5 and we're going to check clamp. So if we Control Shift and left click now, we can see that this less than node is separating all the tiles from the grout. And that's what we want. And so we're going to be using that as a factor to mix our colors. I'm just going to grab both of these guys and move them over here. I'll move the brick a little bit closer. So we're going to hit Shift A and search for a mix RGB. And then we're going to plug this less than value into the factor of this guy. So we can preview this. And for example, I'm just going to show you some basic colors. I'm going to make this like a grayish blue, something like a mortar might be. We're going to be getting into the specific colors later because we're going to be doing a little bit more mixing. Then something like an orange. Obviously, these colors are flipped, but you can sort of see that this is dividing the colors how we want to. So next step is going to be giving the actual colors that we want. And to do that, we'll hit Shift A and we're going to search for a noise texture here. Then we're going to take the mapping and plug it into our vector. And nextly, we're going to hit Shift A and search for a mix RGB node like this. And this is where we're going to plug in our colors. So I'll plug this factor into here, Control Shift and left click. And the hex value on this color 1 is going to be changed to a CB5500. Again, that is a CB5500. Like that, it's sort of an orange color. Then the second color is going to be more on the red and darker. So it's going to be a 742A22. Again, that is a 742A22, like this. So now we have our color here. So before we want to do that, our color is sort of too big and we want it to be a little bit more condensed. So we're going to go into this noise texture and change the scale to a 50 and the detail to a 10, like this. But now we're running into a problem where it's a little bit too contrasty. The colors aren't blending very well. And so to fix that, first, we can check clamp here, and then we can hit Shift A and search for a map range node. So just type in range here, place that in between the noise and the mix. Then we simply just have to take this minimum value here and change it to a 0.25, and this 2 maximum to a 0.75. And that's going to blend the colors in a lot more nicely and lower the contrast between the two. So now that we've done that, we can come over here and hit Shift A, search for a hue saturation node like this. And so now we have this color going into this, so we can easily change the color if we wanted to change this to like a blue or a purple terracotta. a blue, etc. I'm going to be leaving it on 0.5, which is the default for our oranges. So then the value on this, I want to actually change that a little bit. So we're going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to add a math node here, like this. And I'll check clamp. I'm going to take this brick texture here and plug that into the top value, change this value to a 0 for now, take this into here. What that's going to do is it's going to give us a different value for each individual tile. And so that is super cool. So now we can tell that they're tiles instead of being, you know, a giant plane, essentially. Anyways, that is how you do that. And now we just have to add in our mortar. And to do that, it's a very similar process that we just did. So I'll be hitting Shift A, search for another mix RGB, because we're going to be mixing the colors very similarly to this one. I'm going to move all this to keep it a little bit more organized, like this. Hopefully we don't get too confused up here. Then I'm going to take the noise texture here, plug it into our factor down here. Then the colors on this guy, color 1 is going to be changed to a 928 C87. Again, that is a 928 C87, just like that, sort of a gray. And then the second color is going to be changed to a 484 A50. Again, that is a 484 A50, like that. So we have a light gray and a dark gray. Now we have to mix these. And to do that, we already have our mix node that we made earlier. So then we can just move this down here, take the hue saturation into color 2, or into color 1 actually, and then take this mix node into color 2, Control Shift and left click, and we can preview it. And now we have our color, and they are very easily adjustable. And we can also take this hue saturation and hit Shift D and move that down here. So we can also adjust the hue and saturation of our mix node very easily. And I'm actually going to lower the value on this grout here because it's looking a little bit too bright for my liking. So I'll just go down a little bit until I get to something I like. I think 0.5 is a bit better, and that is what I'll be sticking with. And I'll go ahead and check clamp on this for good measure. So now that we have our color done, we have to add in our roughness and the imperfections coming out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and check clamp here, plug this in to finish that up so we know it's done. Then I'm going to go ahead and select this guy and press Control J, just so that we have it out of the way, and I can just move this all the way up here and not worry about losing any nodes. And something I don't want to forget to do before I move on to the roughness is we actually need to factor something into the bump here. So I'll press Shift A, search for a math node here. We're going to switch this value function to less than again, and check clamp. We're going to take this color into this value, leave it on 0.5, and that's going to be like this. So we're going to hit Shift A and add a bump node just so that we have our tiles popping out. So we'll switch this into our height here. Check the invert button because white equals higher up, and currently it's saying the black is where the tiles are, which is not what we want. So we can just take this normal and plug it in here. And if we Control Shift and left click the shader, we can see that this is currently what we have going on. And it's honestly not looking bad. If you don't want to do the imperfections, you can stop here and then just play with the roughness manually, such as like a 0.15, and you might call it a day. But if you want to add the imperfections, add a little bit of detail and realism, then stick around for a little bit longer. And to get started with that, we're simply going to be doing some randomness. So we'll hit Shift A and search for a white noise texture. And this is really cool because if we take this color into this vector and then preview it, it's going to give us a random color for each value here. So if we look at this one, we can see that it's like this, but then we go here and we can see that it completely randomizes everything. You can see it even better if we preview the color instead. But yeah, anyways, we're also going to be hitting Shift A, search for another math node, switch it to less than again, because it's the exact same thing as the previous ones, but because we don't want there to be crossing nodes everywhere, we just use a brand new one in each section. So yeah, we take this brick texture into here, check clamp, and as you can see, it's the same, just providing us a mask. So I'm going to press Shift A, search for a mix RGB here. I'm going to switch this function to add, and I'll check clamp. I'm going to take this value into color 1, and this value into color 2, and switch this all the way up to a 1. And what this is doing is it's telling us that we don't want, it's giving us a mask essentially for how much detail and roughness we want to be affecting certain tiles. So each tile will be individually affected by the roughness in a different way, is what we're doing here. Anyways, with that sort of explained, I guess, we're going to be moving into the actual detail part, which is hitting Shift A, adding a noise texture. And then we're going to take the mapping of our actual mapping node, not the brick texture, and move it into the vector here. Control Shift left click to preview. We're going to switch the scale on this guy to a 30 and the detail to a 10 and the roughness up to a 0.75. So obviously this is a bit much. It's not really giving us imperfections. So we're going to warp this a little bit by adding a map range with Shift A and search. And then we're going to take this value here on the from minimum and move it up to a 0.6. And then this value on the maximum to a 0.7. So now we have a lot of contrast going on here. And now to mix these together, to use the mask to affect it, we're going to hit Shift A, search for a mix RGB here. We're going to take this color, or the map range, into color 2. Then we're going to take this color 1 and make it a black. So if we preview this right now, and then use this guy as a factor, so now that we've added this into the factor, we can sort of see what's going on here. But if I put this color in here, we can see that it's affecting everything, including the mortar. But we don't want it to be affecting the mortar, so we can hit Shift A and search for an invert node here. Then we can take this into here and this into the factor. And now we can see that it doesn't affect the mortar at all. And you might think that's just because it's white instead of black, but it's not. It's because the mask was a little bit backwards. Anyways, we can cut this off now and switch it to a black, and we can see that it's still not affecting, even if we switch this to like a red, maybe. We can see that it's not affecting the mortar, which is what we want. So we'll switch this back to black now. Anyways, that may have been a little bit confusing, but we only want the imperfections to be affecting the tile on the outside, but we're going to factor this into the bump as well, and so that it affects the bump where the mortar is too, so the mortar also gets its own share of imperfections. Anyways, that might be a little complicated, but yeah, anyways. We're going to take this map range and factor into the bump. So I'll hit Shift A and search for a bump node here, like this. We're going to take the result, plug it into our height, and then this strength will move down to a 0.2, or a 0.5 actually, and then check invert. And what that's going to do is it's just going to give us some lowness on those imperfections, so it looks like they've been chipped a little bit. Then we just take this normal into the normal of our other bump. So now we'll go back to previewing this guy. And then we're going to use him for the roughness, obviously, so we'll hit Shift A and then search for a map range node here, like this. Take this into here, we'll preview, and we're going to bring these values in a little bit closer. So the max we're going to move into a 0.4 here, so that we get the more whites showing up, so it's not so blurry. Then this, we're going to factor into a mix node because we want 2 levels of detail. So to keep everything organized, we'll select everything that has to do with the roughness here, like this. I'm going to press Control J, and then I'm going to press Shift D to give us the second one. I'll move it down here just for now. Actually, don't just press Shift D, we can delete that. We're going to select this and press Control Shift D, like this, so we keep all of the inputs. So then I'm just going to take these bumps, and I'm going to move them out of the way, all the way down here real quick, then move this guy up, then we can move our bumps back in. So now that we've done that, I'll just move this map range up here so we can sort of combine them. And then we're going to go to this noise texture on the second one down here, and just to switch the scale to a 20. And so now we can see the difference between these. This has some smaller detail, and this has some larger detail. It's not a huge difference, but it does make an impact. Now that we've done that, we just have to mix them. I'm going to grab these and move them a little bit over here. Then I'm going to press Shift A and search for a mix RGB here, like so. I'm going to take the result of these map ranges into color 1 and color 2, check clamp, and then switch the function to add and a 1. So if we Control Shift and left click now, we can see that the imperfections are adding on top of each other, which is exactly what we want. And neither of them are affecting our mortar, where the roughness is concerned at least. So we also need to factor this extra map range down here into our bump, just like this guy. So with this guy selected, I'll press Shift D, move him over, take this map range into the height, take the normal into the normal of the other one. And so now we have this bump here, plus this bump, and everything's sort of starting to blend together nicely. So now we can preview what we're looking like in the viewport. And we can see that it's sort of starting to take a really cool effect where we have chips in the terracotta and things like that. But where the chips aren't happening, it's almost way too perfect. So we need to be factoring in a little bit of bump in roughness for that. So to do that, it's not very complicated. We're simply going to press Shift A and we'll search up a map range node here. We'll put it in between these two. And if you accidentally put it in the frame, press Alt P and it'll go away. So I'm just going to separate these frames a little bit better. And this one's going to go right in between. Then I'm going to take this noise texture and use it as the base for our base roughness where there's no imperfections. So if we preview this guy, we can see what's going on here. And we want to set our lowest roughness to a 1.15 is what I'll be using. And then the max roughness to a 0.35. And so that's sort of going to give us the values of our roughness. And we're going to be able to change this really easily by hitting Shift A and search for a math node. And then switch it to add clamp, and I'll switch this to a 0. And what this does is it allows us to increase the roughness, the base roughness manually, or decrease it manually if we want it to be shinier. But yeah, that's what this is going to do. And then all we have to do now is mix it with our imperfections. And to do that, we'll press Shift A, search for another mix RGB, of course. Take the color from our mix node into color 1, and this one into color 2. Switch them to add, and the factor to a 1, and check clamp. Now we can see that we have our base roughness with the imperfections on top. And that is looking really good, and it's what we want. So then we simply have to plug this into our roughness here. And then we can Control Shift and left click, and we can see the roughness being affected everywhere. And for further control, we can just duplicate this add guy right here, Shift D, and put it in between. So if we want to up the roughness as a whole, we can do that too. I'll just be leaving it on a 0 though. It's just there for control. So now we just have to factor in a little bit of bump for where there aren't imperfections. And to do that, it's not too complicated. So I'm just going to take these guys and move them a little bit over here. And if you hit Shift and hold and right click and cut over something, you can actually get an extra node and just to stay organized like this. So now I'll be hitting Shift A. I'm going to search up a noise texture like this. This will just be factoring into the bump, like I said. Take the vector from the mapping, plug it in. Then we're going to go to our noise texture here. I'm going to up the scale to a 20 and the detail to a 10. And if we preview it, the roughness to a 0.75, so you can sort of see that it's sort of starting to blur together really nicely. Then I'm going to hit Shift A, search for a mix RGB because we don't want this to be affecting where the imperfections are. So I'm going to take this color into color 1, and then color 2 I'm going to change to a black. All we have to do for the factor on this guy is find this guy where the imperfections are. If we preview him, I'll show you what he is. He is just showing us the imperfections. So we can plug this into our factor here, and if we Control Shift and left click, we can see that it's not doing what we want. And to fix that, we just have to hit Shift A, search for a math node, put it in between them two, and it might move your node somewhere around like this to make it a little bit more confusing for no reason. But yeah, anyways, I'm going to drag them back over here where they should be. Then, on this math node, switch the function to a greater than, and then switch the threshold to a 0.1. What this is saying is if the value is greater than 0.1, then don't affect it. And so, yeah, it's not affecting the imperfections anymore. So then we're going to hit Shift A, search for a bump node, take the result of our mix node into the height, and then change the strength on this guy to a 0.05, like this. Then we can Control Shift and left click this guy. We can see that it's sort of making bumps where the terracotta is, but not where the imperfections are. So we just take the result of this normal and plug it into our other normal. And then we can Control Shift and left click our principled shader. And we have our finished terracotta material. As you can see, we have a nice bump, nice roughness. Everything's pretty easy to change. All you have to do is come in here. You can change the scales of your noise textures. If you think the roughness is too big, you can be like, oh, okay, I'll up this to like a 50, make everything a little bit smaller, things like that. You can change the roughness easily. You can change the base roughness here and the overall roughness here. And you can change the colors with these hue saturations really simply. Yeah, anyways, hopefully you enjoyed this material. Oh, also, you can also change the scale of the bricks manually like this, or what I would recommend is you can change the scale of the whole texture. If you think the bricks are too big, you can make them smaller by upping the scale. If you think that they're too small, you can up it by lowering the scale, and everything moves together. So if you're going to change the scale, I recommend doing it from the mapping node like this. But anyways, that is the material. Hopefully you enjoyed it and can use this cool terracotta in your renders and don't have too much trouble using it. Anyways, I'll see y'all guys in the next one.